Oh, I'm excited to be here tonight. My name is Julie Meredith, and I am the Deputy Secretary for Mega Projects for WASHDOT. So I oversee some of the largest projects that the Washington State Department has ever done in the state of Washington. So I oversee the SR 520 program, which includes the floating bridge over Lake Washington. I oversee the Alaskan Way Viaduct program that has the deep port tunnel that everybody talks about. Interstate 405 program, which will include bus rapid transit on Interstate 405 and express toll lanes, as well as the Puget Sound Gateway program, which will add connections to the ports of Seattle and Tacoma. As Randy said, collectively, I was going to say over $10 billion of infrastructure, but Randy's probably closer when he says 14. But each one of these programs is broken up into smaller projects that get delivered that are probably more closely aligned with the size and the scale with what you're trying to achieve here in the Rose Quarter. So I'm going to talk tonight about a couple of those projects, the Alaskan Way Viaduct program and the SR 520 program. I'm also going to talk about I-5, although Randy stole my drama there about the Freeway Park being the first lid in Seattle and in the country, and I'm going to talk about I-90 a little bit. This is what we affectionately refer to as the box in the city of Seattle. So you've got the I-5 running through the city of Seattle in north-south direction, and just to the west of I-5 is SR 99 or Alaskan Way Viaduct. East of Lake Washington, you've got Interstate 405, which runs through Bellevue. It's right adjacent to Redmond. Those are booming communities on the east side of the lake. And we have two crossings of Lake Washington, I-90 and SR 520, and both are key commuter and freight routes. I-90 is an important freight route. So the first lid in downtown Seattle was Freeway Park, and we think it's the first lid in the country. So you can see I-5 runs north and south on this map, and this is downtown Seattle. And circled there in green is Freeway Park. The idea for Freeway Park came from the community. The community wanted to do something different after the highway was built in the 50s. So in the 60s, the idea came up for a lid or a freeway park, and eventually it goes to vote. The bonds are approved by the voters, and in 1976, Freeway Park is constructed. After a while, the city of Seattle agrees to build the convention center, and the convention center is built adjacent to Freeway Park. As development went on, the city of Seattle is looking at expanding the convention center, and as part of that expansion, they're studying other lids that go over I-5. It's been a really collaborative process. Part of the work to expand the convention center is going to include a feasibility study, and that group is looking at what they're trying to achieve with lids over I-5, and it's just beginning, and it's been part of an exciting process in Seattle. So this is looking southbound. I-5 goes underneath the lid. You can see Freeway Park is on the left side of this slide, and the convention center is shown on the right. And if you were to walk on this lid, this is what you would experience. It's got pathways and elevated walkways, and it does kind of look like 1976. So now I'm going to move over to I-90. So the same year that Freeway Park opened in 1976, the Washington State Department of Transportation entered into an important memorandum of understanding with the local jurisdictions of the city of Seattle, Medina, Bellevue, and the Washington State Transportation Commission, which was our governing body at the time. WASHDOT was interested in adding capacity to I-90, and in order to do that, we needed to address some of the community harm that was done when I-90 was constructed in the first place. And I want to tell you that when this section of I-90 was constructed, about 1.5 miles long, it was the most expensive highway built in the country, about 1.5 miles, worth about $1.5 billion, and the federal participation was about 90 cents on the dollar at that time. So what you see here today is a lid on Mercer Island, and it's called Aubrey Davis Park. Mr. Davis was an important civic leader at the time and throughout much of his life. He was important in securing funding for downtown Seattle's bus tunnel. He was important in securing funding for Portland's light rail system, and later I had an opportunity to work with Mr. Davis as he ran some of our outreach opportunities on 520, and he was just a wonderful human being. Can't say enough about him. But this lid in particular, as you're looking at it, is 2,300 feet long and includes a lot of recreational facilities on it. So I'm going to show you those. If you were walking on the lid today, you would see baseball fields, open space. There's bicycle and pedestrian connections across it, and it is well utilized and loved by the community there. If you were traveling on I-90 towards the city of Seattle, you'll see that on the left side is the city of Seattle, and if you could travel to the right side, you'd be going back to Lake Washington. This is the Mount Baker Tunnel area. The Mount Baker Tunnel, this is called the Sam Smith Park in Seattle. Sam Smith was the first African-American Seattle City Council member, and this area is a historically African-American community. This lid also features community connections, pathways, and park-like features and community gathering spaces. The tunnel itself is 3,400 feet long, which is about 11 football fields if you actually do football fields. And the lid itself is 1,900 feet. So if you were to walk on this lid, you'll see landscaping areas. There's a very key bicycle pedestrian path across Lake Washington that connects into this lid. And I want you to note on the left side of this picture is a ventilation stack. So when you have lids in tunnels of a certain length, you're going to need to have ventilation systems for safety of the drivers in the tunnel. So now I'm going to move further on to the city of Seattle and talk just for a few minutes about the Alaskan Way Viaduct program. In 2001, the Nisqually earthquake hit Seattle, and when it did, it highlighted for Washington State DOT the vulnerability of the structure we had along the viaduct. It was a seismically vulnerable facility that desperately needed to be addressed. The question of how to address it was the question that WASHDOT, the communities, and the city of Seattle struggled with. It took several years of community engagement and outreach before a decision was made. And part of the decision was to include a deep bored tunnel under the city of Seattle. It isn't just a tunnel, though. The Alaskan Way Viaduct program is actually 30 separate projects, 25 of which are complete today. The entire program that's funded by the Washington State DOT is $3.3 billion, although our partners also fund portions of the tunnel and the program. And just a few fun facts: the tunnel is free to drive through today, but it will be tolled as early as August at the end of the summer. And part of the toll, in part, is to pay for the maintenance and operations for the tunnel. The tunnel is about 1.7 miles long. At its deepest, it's 211 feet underground, and its outside diameter is 56 feet, which at the time it was constructed was the largest deep bore tunnel in the world. So community engagement on this program was very involved. There were many, many stakeholders that we worked with, over 14 agencies, our transit providers, King County Metro, Sound Transit. Access to the port is right adjacent to the Alaskan Way Viaduct, and so interactions with the port were key. And in the end, it took a decision by Governor Gregoire, the governor at the time, and she's in the bottom left-hand corner, King County Executive Ron Sims, and the mayor of the city of Seattle, Mayor Nichols at the time, a collective agreement by all of those parties to advance the program to continue what I'll show you here next. I think this is our video. So what you'll see here is at the north end of the program, this is the North Operations Building getting constructed. This is several years of construction. So the tunnel comes out of the portal. You'll see the connection to the local street, and those 4 yellow stacks are the ventilation and operations building, sort of the heart of the building. And I think you can also see this is South Lake Union area. Many buildings going up. It's a lot of construction going on. So that is Alaskan Way Viaduct. Okay. Let's see. So the Alaskan Way Viaduct program, like most programs, had many years of outreach and stakeholder involvement, and while there are a lot of differing opinions about what could happen, we opened the tunnel just this last February. Thank you. Over 100,000 people came to celebrate. We had a run where you could experience the tunnel and the old Alaskan Way Viaduct. There was a bike ride on Sunday morning. During the events, we had science, technology, engineering, math, or STEM events out there. There was music that the City of Seattle sponsored and food trucks. I think the hardest part of this day was at the end of the weekend, the public really had to say goodbye to a structure they either loved or hated. And so that was their moment to do so. It isn't possible to do a program like the Alaskan Way Viaduct without partners. The Port of Seattle was completely engaged, provided funding for some of the work. FHWA provided some funding, but also was key to keeping things moving. King County Metro and Sound Transit were important partners for us to keep public moving. While we were doing construction like this in the City of Seattle and WASHDOT have successfully collaborated throughout this process. In fact, when we actually connected the surface streets to the new tunnel, we had to close both the viaduct and the tunnel in order to make those connections in January for about 3 weeks. And it would not have been possible to do that without all the agencies working collectively together to solve problems and move the public during a definite pinch in travel. So partnerships are key. The program is not done. This slide represents the vision that the City of Seattle's waterfront team has for connecting the downtown area to the waterfront, which would not be possible without removal of the structure that is there today. So you can see what they have here is significant community enhancements for connections and recreation along the waterfront that would not be possible. This is funded in part by a local improvement district that it's being implemented by the City of Seattle, and they are leading the design and construction will begin on this summer. So right now, my team is doing the demolition of the existing structure, and then this summer, we turn over that space so that the City of Seattle can build their neighborhood connections. It's going to be pretty exciting. So now I'd like to talk about the SR 520 program. At the same time that the earthquake was shaking downtown Seattle, the SR 520 program was also underway. Like the viaduct, the SR 520 corridor included a vulnerable structure. The floating bridge across Lake Washington on 520 was constructed in 1963. It had been battered by the wind wave action. The department had conducted retrofits, and what we decided is we could no longer continue relying on the 520 floating bridge into the future, and we needed to replace it. After some significant public outreach, we worked on a purpose and need for an EIS, and so if you humor me, I just want to read our EIS purpose and need statement. It's pretty short. The purpose is to improve mobility for people and goods across Lake Washington within the 520 corridor from Seattle to Redmond in a manner that would be safe, reliable, and cost-effective while avoiding, minimizing, and or mitigating effects on neighborhoods and the environment. So embedded in the purpose of our project was addressing effects to the community. And we worked with the community knowing that that was our purpose and need, and we knew that we needed their support in order to address our mobility needs. In fact, through the years of collaboration with the community, when we knew financing was going to be difficult, the community actually supported tolling 520 in order to pay for the project while we were under construction. So we began tolling while we were building the floating bridge. It helped us manage traffic, but it also helped us finance the project. So the 520 program, just as you see on this map, starts in Seattle on the west side and extends out. Most of the work is between Seattle and Bellevue at 405. And like most projects this size, we broke it up into separate projects. So the East Side Transit and HOV project, which I'll highlight here in a bit, because it was constructed and opened in 2014. We built the pontoons for the floating bridge in Aberdeen and Tacoma and floated them in and put them on the lake, and we opened the new floating bridge in 2016. And then we built the fixed structure from the floating bridge to Seattle, and we opened that just last year. And so now I'm going to talk a little bit about our lids. First I'm going to talk about our outreach. I know we're talking about the Rose Quarter project, but just to give you a scale for what the outreach was on this project, community engagement on the 520 program actually began in late 1990s. We talked about going around Lake Washington, under Lake Washington, what modes we would have. We learned about magnetic levitation, so maybe that'll come back again. And in order to move forward, we needed all the communities on the east side of Lake Washington, which have a very different focus, to agree with the communities on the west side of Lake Washington, which have a different focus. And it was only through collaboration and balancing their needs that we're able to move forward. So you can see in the corner here, in the bottom right-hand corner, the last funding package, the last key, was signed in 2015 by then Governor Inslee. And off to the corner in the red is the Secretary of Transportation at the time, Lynn Peterson. In our collaboration with the community, we needed to agree on what we were trying to achieve with the lids. So first and foremost, the community wanted us to be sensitive to the environment that we were working in. They wanted us to consider the topography, so we wouldn't create walls that one side of the community had as a barrier while the other side of the community was connected. Some of the areas we're in, you'll see the community wanted passive open space. They wanted community gathering space. They wanted our designs to consider things other than single occupant vehicle travel. So you'll see that it's a multimodal bike pedestrian facility and connectivity with transit as part of it. And at this point, we couldn't rely on federal funding like we did on I-90. So some of the things we discussed were the length of the lids. Some of the length of the lids can drive some of the things around tunnel fire, life, and safety considerations, which can be expensive. The depth of the lid, or how deep it is, which can be in part determined by the features on the lid, and width. So while the 520 corridor was getting wider to accommodate HOV lanes, the communities knew that at some point, light rail may go through this corridor, and they didn't want our lids to preclude that from happening. So we designed them with forward compatibility should light rail come. So this is the 520 corridor. You're looking west. So on the close side, on the bottom side, you see that's Medina, Clyde Hill, Bellevue, Yarrow Point, Lake Washington, and Seattle is off in the distance. What you see here is the first lid on the east side. This is 92nd. This is our conceptual design that we worked through with the communities while we were under construction. So if you were to look at the design of this lid during our environmental process, it would look slightly different. This is our design build contractor reflecting our WASHDOT's desires and the community desires in this lid. This is as we envisioned it. This is as it's constructed. 520 is underneath the lid. We have a transit stop at this lid. You can see, if I can point right here. This is the transit stop. You have elevators to go down to the transit stop and stairs. We call this little section right here a kiss and ride, where you can drive through in your car. It was a classic use at this site, so kids get out, go down, catch the bus, and go off to school, or you drop your significant other to go off and ride the bus. Here, if you look across here, you can't hardly see it in this photo, but that's our regional bicycle pedestrian path, which goes east-west across the lake. And these paths along here connect to the local trail that goes through the east side. So the lid incorporated the multimodal features, open space, and bicycle pedestrian features the community desired, while accommodating transit down below. If you travel further west, this is 84th. This is the only lid on the east side that didn't have a transit stop as part of it. This is as it was designed during construction, and this is as constructed. So what you can see is the freeway down below. This is 84th, which goes across. What they wanted was a connection to their park, which is over here. So our regional trail goes east-west across. We have north-south local bicycle pedestrian features. And after we constructed, the local community is working right now on adding another bicycle pedestrian trail along their local system on 84th, and we're helping facilitate that within our right-of-way. This is the furthest west lid on the east side. This is Evergreen Point Road in Medina. Again, it has a transit feature as part of it. This community struggled with the park and ride lot. They just couldn't say goodbye to it. So it is the same size as it was before we constructed it as it is now. So it's a modest 50-stall park and ride lot. This is the lid as constructed. So here is your access to transit with your stairs and elevators, a park and ride lot. Up here is their park, so we connect to the park, and our regional bicycle trail comes right across here, connects to the park, and then continues on to the bridge. There's a local trail system that goes north-south, and this is the outlook. So when you visit the I-90 or the 520 lid, we call that the money shot because it's actually pretty beautiful. Again, this is actually one of the flyer stops we built, and we designed it in close partnership with Sound Transit, our transit agency, and King County Metro. 520 corridor is an important commuter corridor, and in the future, it's either going to be a high-capacity bus rapid transit corridor or a light rail corridor. I think that decision is yet to be made. And what we didn't want was to create, we didn't want to create barriers to that design in the future, so we designed to accommodate those. Now I'm going to travel a bit across the lake. This is City of Seattle, Montlake interchange area. So what you have is 520 running east-west, and this right here is SR 513 or Montlake Boulevard. So 520, before we told it, carried 100,000 trips a day. Montlake Boulevard carries about 60,000 trips a day, so it's a very congested area. As you can see here, and imagine, the neighborhood was split by 520 when 520 was constructed. This is a historic neighborhood divided by 520 in the 1960s. What you can see off the map is Lake Washington. Lake Washington, it carries several salmon habitat in it. These are endangered species in Lake Washington that we had to deal with. It's a sensitive shoreline along there that we needed to protect. We had water quality issues, historic neighborhoods, and in this area, there are several tribes with cultural resource issues that we needed to respect. So I guess I should add, just off the map here is the University of Washington. And the University of Washington includes several hospital and recreational facilities. And while we were doing the construction of the lake, Sound Transit constructed the University Link Station, which is a key part of the new transit system. So our 520 corridor needed to be designed in conjunction with what Sound Transit was doing at the University Link Station. So, after much consultation with the neighborhoods, this is the design of the new lidded area and freeway for the 520 Montlake area. So if you were to look in our environmental document, this lid would have spanned all the way from here to here. But in consultation with the neighborhood, we found out, as you looked at what you wanted the lid to accomplish, which was connecting neighborhoods, Because of the topography, you ended up with a 30 to 40 foot wall on the north side of that, and you actually couldn't actually walk across the lid. You ended up with some dead space that we didn't think was going to be very useful and not encouraging the actual activity we wanted. So in working with the neighborhood, what they really wanted was to be able to connect across the lid. So this is the connection that we kept. This is a 70-foot wide, we call it our land bridge, but it's for bicycle and pedestrians only, and it includes the lookout so people can enjoy their water view. They can walk across and not have to, they didn't really want to see the freeway as they walked across. So that was our function there. The lid here is about 800 feet long, and on the lid, HOV ramps come up on the inside in their separate lanes. We have our regional transit stops here, which connect to the local transit stops here. And then we have our open space right along here. So this was done in consultation with the neighborhoods after our environmental document was complete, but we continued the conversations. This contract has been let and awarded, and construction will begin this summer. If you were to walk on the lid as we envision it, this is the transit stop, so we've got a covered walkway for all of the area, and we designed that in consultation with the transit agencies, who in the end will need to maintain it, so we needed to make sure that they understood what was going to be constructed. And here's the open space, and what we're hoping is that the transit area becomes an area people want to gather at and go to and enjoy, and the Seattle Parks Department is working with us to make sure that they can maintain that. So this is the animation of the section of the highway that we haven't constructed yet. So you're flying down, going on I-5 northbound right here, and you're going to exit I-5 and travel eastbound on 520. So you're going to do the turn, and you're going to go under the proposed lid between the local streets of 10th and Delmar, and this lid will be not flat like the other lids. It'll step down with the topography, and this is you exiting to Portage Bay. This is flying over the lid, which will have bicycle pedestrian features on it, and this is Portage Bay Bridge, which we have further consultation to do, but you'll see will be between yacht clubs on the left, sensitive environmental areas on the right, and as you get closer, you can see the new Montlake lid in the future and the off-ramp to Montlake Boulevard. And that's 520. And this is my last slide for the night. 520 included a bicycle pedestrian corridor where there never was one before. I like to say bikes could cross 520, but they paid a $25 toll to do it. And so when we opened the bicycle pedestrian path, it was a cold, frigid day in December, and there were thousands of people who showed up to ride across it. So we've put in a bike counter on that trail, and since we opened it, over 320,000 people have used it. And I predict it'll be the most popular recreational commuter corridor in Washington State. So, pretty proud of that.